Hello, everybody. I'm Ralph Barker, and this is Laura McCullough. Welcome to Focal Points. And before we forget it, our email is focalpointschannel@gmail.com. We forgot to mention that before. We forgot to do that. So welcome back. We're going to talk today a little bit about cremation, maybe funerals. I'm not sure where we're going to go with it. But I know a lot of people have asked the question, is it unbiblical or is it wrong to get cremated? Obviously, it's a lot cheaper, and I know that hits the pocketbook. You're talking about funerals today are averaging $9,000, $10,000, $11,000.
Right. Well, if you watched the last episode, we were talking about the loss of Pastor Gordon here at Cornerstone Church, and he was also active with One Ministries, our Sabbath gathering, and it impacted us greatly, and we had a beautiful celebration of life.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to pause really quickly. So in the last episode, I had been trying to find a verse in Isaiah, and it really bothered me that I couldn't find it, because I always look silly, like I don't know my scriptures. I hope that you guys have watched us enough to believe that we do read the scriptures. I'm terrible put on the spot with certain verses. So the verse I was trying to find was Isaiah 57:1, and what it says is, "The righteous one has perished. Why do you not take it to heart? And committed, faithful men are taken away. Why does no one understand that the righteous one is taken away from the presence of evil in the world, and he enters into his peace? They who walk in integrity shall rest on their beds." And so it's basically saying that to be taken away from the world is to rest and be at peace. When we say rest in peace, right, this is the verse that resting in peace comes from. So when you would like RIP, the entire funerary greeting of the Western world to rest in peace to a person who has died comes from Isaiah 57:1 and 2. So
it's interesting that just went back to what you said on the last program about soul sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting that in 1 Corinthians, I think it's 15, when they're talking about misusing the communion, and it says
right, 1 Corinthians 15 is all about the resurrection, and I believe that's in there as well.
Well, also, but it says that those that violated this slept.
Some of them have fallen asleep.
Yeah. That's interesting. Fallen asleep.
Yeah.
Which is a lot lighter word than death or that kind of thing.
Well, and whether it's an idiom or literal, but see that kind of factors into. So the question about funerary services, is it biblical to be cremated? And we actually have some viewers who have actively asked for us to talk about this. We've had 3 separate requests for this topic to be discussed, because it is a big question. Because you don't want the last act or the last thing that you do for a family member or a loved one to be something that's going to be displeasing to God, right? And so different denominations, different practices within the Christian faith have come to very strong conclusions, one way or the other, that this is allowed or this is not allowed. I don't know many arguments besides the fact that the idea being, if you cremate the body, then what is there for the Father to resurrect, was one of the arguments. Are you aware of other arguments against cremation?
No, but of course it talks about having a new body.
Yes.
They're going to take the molecules of this body and bring it back together and give me, it's going to be a new body.
Exactly. But then the argument is made that Christ, when he came back, he was in his very same body because he still had the holes for Thomas to put his finger into, right? So even the Messiah himself, when resurrected, was given the very same body.
But it wasn't really the same body.
And this is where I would venture to say that a glorified and redeemed body, that the wounds were there for the very purpose of believing that it was him.
Right, but probably just for that reason.
Exactly.
Though, because I don't think someone who was mangled in a car wreck is going to be like this walking around heaven.
And it's also interesting that he didn't bear any of the other wounds. He didn't have the wounds from the crown of thorns. He didn't have the wounds from the scourging. He didn't have any of the other wounds except for the nail holes to prove that it was him. Right, so that's an interesting idea.
Very good. That is good.
I also think, so I'll get to another argument that's made is the fact that it's used in pagan cultures, but we'll get to that later. So the idea of the body itself. So the friends of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, went into the furnace without fear.
Right.
There would have been nothing left of them. It was so hot that it burned the men who were trying to put them into the fire, right?
They were cremated.
They were.
Involuntarily.
So do we believe that these righteous men who were written down as examples of heroes of faith would have risked their salvation by being burned to cinders had there not been the Christophany theophany. We talked about these words. Theophany
yeah.
that appeared in the furnace with them.
Mm-hmm.
The being, whether you believe it was an angel or Christ himself that appeared in the furnace with them, are we saying that they would not then have had resurrection? Or so another example would be martyrs who were burned at the stake. In Revelation, it says that the blood of martyrs cries out from under the altar.
Yeah.
So people who were burned at the stake for their faith, that were burned to a crisp, do they have no body in which to be resurrected? It's almost like we're ascribing to the idea. So this is one of the reasons that they burned you. It's not just that it was this horrific death, that it was such a torturous death. One of the reasons that they burned the saints was because the belief was if the body was burned and gone, that you couldn't be resurrected. So,
I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
So are we then say that's why cremation was forbidden?
Mm-hmm.
So cremation is forbidden in the Catholic Church, and then cremation was what was enacted against martyrs and enemies of the church. So it was a...
Well, this is a parenthetical thought here, but back to the Daniel story,
yes.
Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Well, the person that said there was a fourth person in there, like the Son of God, most translations say like a son of the gods, not the Son of God. King James, I think, says the Son of God, but it's really translated a son of... They would know. I mean, they would say they believed in polygamy.
Polytheism.
I mean, polytheism.
And polygamy.
Yeah, right, both of them are right.
That's another show.
Yeah, but that's true. So they believed, in many gods. So they would say it that way.
They would, because they didn't recognize this. They didn't... Well, we have to say that Nebuchadnezzar was on his way to confessing. This is what convinced him that there was one true God of heaven and earth, right? But at the time, the people who were describing it, the guards, they would not have had a monotheistic language or a patristic language of the son of a father, regarding Christ. That's not a language that would have been used in that story. So I agree with that.
Well, that's some good points, though, about cremation and the martyrs and things like that.
We're basically saying we ascribe to the idea that cremation negates your ability to be resurrected. We're saying that those who burned the martyrs were successful in preventing their resurrection, and to the idea that these people would have more power than the Father himself. So let me back up, because it's talking about this being something of the Catholic Church, and I'm talking about martyrs. That's tricky, because people want to kind of envision those Christians who were burned for their faith being burned by the Romans or burned by unchristian governments. And so it's a tricky thing to say that martyrs burned for their faith were burned by the Catholic Church. And I realized I needed to put a qualifier there.
That's good.
Because there were seasons. I'm not in any way... I'm just going to put that qualifier on there, because historically, there are very much people who we would now say had a biblically sound faith who were burned for that faith by the authorities of the Catholic Church in their region at that time. So there's my qualification. I'll leave it alone.
But again, just getting back to the bottom dollar, it is much, much cheaper to cremate.
Yes.
And I know today especially people are suffering, financially. See what I'm doing? I'm just getting a Tupperware coffin. You just burp it and put it in the ground.
I want to be in a pine box. Here's the thing. We have a little bit of time. We have a couple more minutes to talk about this. Okay, so one of the arguments against cremation is that pagan cultures cremated their dead. Like the Vikings did a funeral pyre, right? Mm-hmm. Many cultures did, because they didn't understand sanitation. And burning your dead is safer than burying your dead near your water sources. They had no understanding of cross-contamination. They were just put straight in the ground. There was no embalming, there was no casket, there was none of that. And so dead bodies put straight in the ground is super dangerous. Now, that's one of the reasons it's illegal, right? Now there are places you can be put in a pine box and not embalmed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have an issue.
You can do that in Georgia. You can do that in Georgia.
So one of my issues, to say that not to cremate a person, to cremate a person is a pagan ritual. Having a big showy funeral where we idolize the dead person in a casket is way more pagan than cremating a person. Okay, I have a huge problem with the vast majority of funerals now. Okay, grieving, what different. The person needs to process, honoring someone who is gone, celebrating their life, all of that is fine. And I'm not telling anyone what they should or shouldn't do. I'm just saying, for me personally, to have someone say, you will not be resurrected if you're cremated, and then go and spend $80,000 to idolize a body that no longer has a spirit in it, I can't reconcile that myself. I find that the vast majority of modern funerary practices to be far more pagan.
Well, and just because pagans did it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. Just because
Correct.
It's pagan, they do things that I hadn't done research on it, but I'm sure they did things that we do now.
I'm pretty sure they use the potty.
Yeah, they probably did at some point. But the Old Testament has a lot of sanitary laws. You know that.
Yes, I do.
About dead bodies and all that kind of thing.
And going to the potty.
And going to the potty. People don't realize that there's very practical stuff in there.
Yes.
About. In fact, I mentioned that I was on the PTL club back with Tammy Faye back years and years ago, and that actually came up in our conversation. We were talking about biblical worldview, and I said, well, this word here tells you even how to go potty. I mean, this is in here. And it's very important because there's nobody watching this that doesn't go potty every now and then. So you need to know what to do.
So that you don't get cholera, okay? It's
That's
very
right.
important. So it is, and that's why, for our, as Messianic believers, applying the commandments when people, and we'll have to go through that on an episode sometime, because one of the arguments is there's the ceremonial law and the moral law.
Yeah.
But there are things in there that are just plain out for your good, like take a bath and don't poop where your water is. Go outside the camp and bury it under the ground. One of the things that you were commanded was to own a shovel. That every household had to have a shovel so that you could go and be sanitary. And it talks about how to handle the dead. And it talks about that if a person has touched a dead body, that they need to wash their body in water. They need to wash their hands, and they need to then be unclean until that evening. So basically, you're not going to come straight back from burying a dead body and make a sandwich in your kitchen.
Right.
And so there's instructions for all of that.
So we want everybody to buy a shovel, take it home. No, just kidding. Well, we're going to end on this one. We're getting there, but this has been good. I mean, I actually changed my mind about cremation because I didn't think much about it, to be honest. I didn't know about those examples. That was really good for me, and I hope it is for those that are watching.
It's given me some peace because all of my family members have decided for cremation, and it was something, in the Torah observant community, there's a lot of discussion about this, and the vast majority of people find it to be a practice that they don't want to implement for themselves, and I had to dig into it because just the thing is, there is no biblical, while there are biblical commands about the other things we talked about, there is zero instruction saying you should not be cremated. It does say not to learn the ways of the pagan and do as they do, but this isn't something that's necessarily a learned practice. This is something that, again, the example would be the Valley of Dry Bones, right? So the Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel 37, we have an entire valley full of bodies that are completely gone, right? There is no body to be resurrected there. So the Father can, he made us from the dirt. He made us from the dust the first time, right? He made Adam from the dust the first time. And so if he is in fact constructing a body for a person to be resurrected, I'm pretty sure that he can do it from the dust.
Just to kind of make a point here, if you're on, let's say you're out in the ocean somewhere and you fall off the ship and die, of course, fish or whoever's going to come and eat you. And then they're going to go and somebody's going to eat them. Now, it's not a problem for God, but to put all those pieces back together again.
In Revelation, it specifies that the sea and the dead that are in it is in the list of the resurrection. It actually specifies the sea and the death. So where we die, how we die, the condition of our body after we're dead, I don't understand how we can apply some sort of salvational thing to that, because the other thing is that sometimes that's beyond a person's control. If a person dies suddenly and their family chooses to have them cremated, whether or not it was against their wishes, how can we then assign a salvational aspect to that?
Well, that's good. Well, we'll come back next time. What are we going to talk about next week or next day? What's the next
whatever
program?
we do,
Next program.
whatever it comes on next.
Next program.
Well, we have quite a few
Oh,
things.
we're going to, yeah, we got a couple. We're going to do old Earth, young Earth. That's one thing
Right.
we're going to do.
And then we can
And
talk
transfiguration.
about, and then ceremonial versus moral law, etc. That one, that's a deeper one. We might put that one off for a minute, so I have some better examples instead of going off the cuff. But I can, so we'll see.
Remember, we're always going off the cuff.
That's
Obviously,
true.
we have not studied this.
We're so off the cuff, neither of us have
That's what's
cuffs.
fun. That's what's fun. That's what makes it interesting. By the way, please, I know I mentioned before, but email us some ideas.
Yes.
We're always looking for ideas of things to talk about, and I'm sure you got some ideas we hadn't thought of. So email us at focalpointschannel@gmail.com. Focalpointschannel@gmail.com. Till then, God bless. See you next time.